Josh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I want to start by talking to you kind of overall as we look at the situation with Iran once again attacking those ships in the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking two ships that are linked to the United Arab Emirates. What does all of that say about where things stand and the fact that we are getting these other countries there that are condemning Iran for these attacks?
Well, Josh, it's a positive sign that those Sunni neighbors, their Sunni Islamic countries in the Persian Gulf region, are condemning these attacks. Bahrain did. The British Maritime Trade Agency reported perhaps another tanker was hit by a drone within the last 24 hours. The big picture, though, is that while these attacks have taken place, we are getting some movement coming through the Strait of Hormuz in terms of oil being shipped. In fact, Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, reported just a couple of days ago that we're getting about 9 million barrels out of there and another 6 million coming largely across that transcontinental pipeline that the Saudis have running from east to west. And so we're up to about 15 million barrels coming out for the last week, which is about 75% of maximum flow coming out of the Persian Gulf. So that is a positive sign. But these attacks have got to stop. Fortunately, those tankers appeared to make it through. That's good. But, you know, as the president says, nobody wants $1 billion ship to be subject to attack coming through these straits. And the big thing I've been watching is that Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is the strategic choke point between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The Houthi rebels attacked apparently a cargo ship, a Tanzanian cargo ship, a couple of days ago. And if that strait gets closed, you better watch out for gas prices. But right now we're in a cycle and it needs to be broken at some point for sure.
And I talked about this kind of off the top as I was introing you here, but I-24 News English and several outlets reporting this as a result of the comments by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who announced that the U.S. is preparing to impose measures on Iran, quote, unprecedented in the history of a country's economic isolation. What can we kind of gauge from that? Because that almost says, look, the talks have stalled, so we need to find something else that we can do to punish Iran.
Well, the talks have stalled, and technically this MOU expires Sunday the 17th. You know, it was a 60-day MOU. Both sides have declared it's been dead in the water. You know, within the last week or so, or 2 weeks really, the military action has moved largely from large airstrikes to naval enforcement. But it's clear that we're in a cycle, Josh, and something has to happen. And from the American perspective, I'd rather see sanctions turned up more, really steeply than run the risk of the war escalating. And so I think it's a step in the positive direction for the American side. The Iranians, if they'll respond to anything, it's going to be to cutting off their money supply, which we've done a pretty decent job already. But it'll be interesting to see what the specifics are the Secretary is proposing.
And right here, you are taking that live look at the Strait of Hormuz. Once again, this is coming in from marine traffic, where you can see, as we've seen for a while, not a whole lot of movement. We also heard from Pete Hegseth, and he said that the U.S. could, quote unquote, indefinitely maintain that naval blockade of Iran. We know that essentially Iran and the IRGC say that they are in charge of the Strait of Hormuz, and then you have President Trump saying, no, it's the U.S. So who is in control, and what would a full blockade there of Iran indefinitely really mean?
Well, first off, we're getting movement through the strait. Again, according to the Secretary of Energy, 9 million barrels a day is the moving average over the last several days. The ordinary capacity is 20 million, but we're moving a lot of that oil, or the Saudis are, through pipeline. The U.S. is primarily in control of it, but the problem with the Strait of Hormuz is that we're in a period, Josh, of asymmetric warfare. What I mean by that is, of course, you have cheap but destructive weapons being used by a lesser military, opponent, such as $30,000 drones, to harass shipping coming through there. It appears that we have pretty much cleared the mines out of that strait. Mines are even more dangerous than drones in many ways, because a mine will break a ship in half if you hit it the wrong way. And so while we are primarily in control of it, we aren't, we're dealing with pesky, attacks from these drones and these mines and things of this nature that really is going to spook the international oil markets. And that's the problem we've got.
One thing that's been talked about, I would say a lot over the past several months, is whether or not there would be ground troops from the U.S. that go into Iran. Iran issuing a threat saying earlier on this week that if the U.S. were to send any kind of troops, it wouldn't end well. So is there any world where the U.S. actually sends troops onto the ground there in Iran as the conflict continues?
Well, first off, Iran and its rhetorical hot air remind me of Baghdad Bob from the Iraqi war 20, 30 years ago, however long it's been. You can't really trust what they're saying. The issue is whether the president wants to do that. I don't think the country wants any sort of massive, ground war at all. And I don't think the president wants to do that either. But I do think that, we're going to have a combination of finding a way to step up the military ferocity of the campaign, something short of ground troops, while at the same time perhaps ratcheting up economic sanctions, as the Secretary of the Treasury was talking about this week. I don't think we're going to see a massive ground invasion. America doesn't want another forever war. And the difference between what's happened here, even though we're ready to see it end, but it's we're into March, April, May, June, July. We're into the fourth month or so. There have been no ground troops. We've lost some Americans. It's not been a massive loss of life, but one life is too much. But I don't foresee that happening, Scott. I just don't. You might see special forces go in, but you can't trust the Iranians. And the pickle that we're sort of in, you've almost got to take that government out in order to accomplish our objectives here. And it would take ground troops to do that. I don't think we're going to see it.
And there's been a lot of information, you just touched on this, but a lot of hot air, so to speak, that's coming from Iranian officials there, as there's questions about who is actually in charge there in Iran. And we have this post coming in from U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, as they try to clarify some of that false information that's out there. And I want to read this. I know the type is very, very small, but the claim: over the past 48 hours, multiple media outlets have reported several false claims related to the USS Abraham Lincoln's deployment to the Middle East. One report alleged 7 sailors died in a brawl aboard the aircraft carrier, and others have recently suggested a spike in suicidal ideations. These reports are false. The fact: USS Abraham Lincoln has maintained among the highest crew enlistment rates, 84.4% of all aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy. The sailors and Marines of the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remain resilient and resolved after more than 260 days at sea, 10,000 aircraft flights, and 1.5 million pounds of ordnance expended. No service members aboard the aircraft carrier have died, and the one sailor who fell overboard August 3rd was quickly and safely recovered. The rampant misreporting on Abraham Lincoln's historic deployment is a disservice to our men and women in uniform and their loved ones. How important is it for the Pentagon to get ahead of some of these false reports that are out there, whether they're coming from Iran or different agencies that are reporting them via sources?
Yes, Josh, I thought they did a pretty good job there of debunking those rumors pretty quickly. You remember USS Abraham Lincoln's Nimitz-class carrier. It has a full complement between the air crew and the ship's crew of about 5,000. So it's like a city, on steel, out there enforcing American naval power. You can't, if something like that happened, it'd be hard to stifle it up. I'm confident that CENTCOM's debunking of these theories is accurate, but this appears to be, again, propaganda stuff floating out there to try to make it appear as if, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are suddenly, either depressed or not into following the orders of their superiors. It seems to be a propagandist tool, but CENTCOM did a good job of tamping it down. It's very difficult sometimes in this internet age with everybody and their brothers got a laptop and rumors can get started so quickly, but I think they did an effective job here. I have no reason to believe those reports are accurate.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of questions about what is accurate, what is that accurate information versus some of the fiction that we're hearing. Now, as we look at the Strait of Hormuz one more time, this has become a sticking point because if you think about it, off the top of Operation Epic Fury, there was so much discussion about the nuclear program, Iran's nuclear program, and preventing them from ever having a nuclear weapon. But does it seem almost as if everything's kind of focused now on the Strait of Hormuz? What are your thoughts?
Josh, you make a good point. There's in economics, you talk about macroeconomics and microeconomics. The immediate concern right now is international shipping. That doesn't mean that Iran's nuclear capabilities are not a major concern. They certainly are, and it's a dangerous situation. But you want, the world's economy and the flow of this oil supply is crucial. The Iranians are claiming they want to come in and put a tax and control the strait. That is a violation of all norm of international law. We have a number of strategic choke points around the world, whether it's the Strait of Hormuz, the Bosphorus there in Turkey, the Strait of Malacca, the Taiwan Strait. Every one of these straits is considered to be international territory, and we send our Navy through these straits to maintain, international shipping lanes. And so you're right. In the short term, the focus is on that strait because the world's oil prices and our own economy here in the United States depends on it to a large degree.
All right, Don Brown, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, helping to break down all the latest developments out of there. Again, we only talked about a small portion because there's so much going on right now in the Middle East. Anything that we missed, anything that you want to make sure gets mentioned here before I let you go?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the specific economic sanctions that the Secretary of the Treasury is talking about. We'll be watching that in the next few days. But we're in a cycle now. The cycle continues to go on, and hopefully those sanctions are going to break us out of it. We'll have to see how that goes.
All right, Don Brown, thank you again for being here with us. We definitely appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Josh. Thank you.